I mean, I used to sell newspapers for a living. I mean, I would go out and sell newspapers, right? And I mean, and I keep a percentage of the money that I raised. That was one thing I used to do. People used to see me. Actually, it's funny. My wife used to see me. I used to, around this time of year, not because this year, not because of the pandemic, but in Union Square every year, not this year because of the pandemic, but every year they have this like Union Square is full of like booths selling like jewelry and stuff like that. And it's by the subway stop. And so every year at Christmas time, I would take big stacks of the Workers' World newspaper and I would stand by the subway stop at this like holiday festival in Union Square with communist newspapers and shout, "Communist newspaper, get the latest issue, communist newspaper, communist newspaper." And I would sell 60, 70 of them in a night, right? Take home the dollars, use it to eat for the next couple days, you know? I had no problem doing that, I mean, I was spreading the good word, I was proud to do it, right? I used to, if I was short on dough, I would go near subway stops in New York City at rush hour when everyone's rushing on the subway, stand by the subway stop, hold up the latest issue, communist newspaper, communist weekly, get the latest issue, and people would buy it. People would pay good money for it, that's what I would do. And when I started doing that, the leaders of the Workers' World Party started preventing me from writing for the newspaper. And I don't know why that was, but for some reason, the fact that I was selling the newspaper and would sell their newspapers, like crazy, they suddenly didn't want me writing for it anymore. I don't know what that was about. Maybe they thought I was showing them up because 200 copies of their newspaper went in the garbage every week. But for some reason, when I was selling their newspaper every day, I was going out and selling their paper and bringing back money to the office that I sold. Suddenly they, "Oh, well, he can't write for the paper anymore." And every time I would go to write an article, they would find an excuse not to publish it. I mean, like I said, these groups are about fulfilling the egos of some old boomers. But yeah, I that was one way I used to make money, selling newspapers. And I used to do other little hustles like that, I mean, at that point, I was building a communist organization full time. I lived someplace, I like lived in the home of a party person and I sold newspapers and yeah, I mean, they were tough times, but, I moved ahead and other people recognized my skills. I had more to contribute, right? I was a very skilled person. I was a very good speaker, very good writer. I mean, you all are on here watching me for a reason. But these other people, they just, oh no, I mean, no, it's all about us. It's all about us. We've been in charge of this group and it's been getting weaker and weaker and weaker and falling apart, but we know everything and it's all about us and it's our little ego trip. And it was weird. And then other people, I started doing a lot of interviews with international media. I was invited to universities to give talks. Proudly selling a communist newspaper at Public Square and police didn't bother you. That's impressive. Well, I mean, in New York City, they don't bug you, right? Because there's been enough lawsuits and stuff, right? There's been enough lawsuits in New York City that they tend to not bug you, right? In Cleveland, they were particularly nasty, right? In Cleveland, I remember there were times where I had issues selling the paper, right? Police would come up to you, "Do you have a permit to sell that?" And stuff like that. You don't have to have a permit to sell a communist newspaper, right? There's been a lot of court rulings that if it's political speech, you don't need a permit, right? And just selling it for $1 does not make it not political speech. Free speech doesn't mean you can't charge $1 for it. And there's been court rulings about this that they call free speech art. If your art is political, the courts have ruled you have the right to charge $1. So nowhere around this country can they legally prevent you from selling newspapers, but they do it all the time around this country. I mean, and honestly, selling newspapers, I mean, this is kind of outdated, okay? Like, I mean, newspapers are not really a thing anymore, and it's kind of a boomer thing to do, and I don't think selling newspapers is going to be a thing in the future, but it's worth talking about, right? This person, I don't know what their point was. Oh, they saw you selling it, and I don't know what they were getting at, but the thing is, though, it's, right, that in Cleveland, there were many instances that I was aware of where somebody would be selling the communist newspaper, and we would sell it on this one street in like Coventry in Cleveland. We'd be selling the newspaper up and down that street, and somebody in a store wouldn't want us there. So they'd call the police, and the police would show up, and they'd be like, "You don't have a permit to sell that." And we'd say, "We don't need a permit to sell it, right? Because this is legally protected free speech." "Yeah, but you're selling something, you need a permit." "No, no, we don't need a permit. We don't need a permit." And the police would say, "Oh, you're having an attitude," and arrest them. And the charge wouldn't be selling a newspaper. The charge would be like disorderly conduct. That kind of thing happens all the time. All the time, people get arrested for selling newspapers. Now, New York City is a little bit different, right? New York City, like I said, right? New York City, people come here from all over the world. The UN is here. This is the USA trying to put on its smiley face and show people how nice it is, right? And Muslims never get harassed in New York City, and New York, they do. But no, but New York City, because the UN is here, because there's millions of people here, because this city is culturally a little bit more like Europe than the United States, they don't tend to mess with people selling communist newspapers in New York City. If you go out and sell a communist newspaper in New York City, they don't tend to mess with you, because there's so many communists in New York City, because there's so many lawsuits, and because this city has kind of an internationalist vibe to it. But yeah, in many cities around the country, especially when there's like development areas that have their own, it's different. So it's important to point that out. But yeah, there's been many cases where people get arrested, get beaten up for selling a communist newspaper. There's been many times that's happened. But I don't know. The other thing was, I will say this, right? My feeling whenever I would go out and sell is, if someone's going to mess with me, for the most part, I don't escalate it, right? There are some people that, if I was in front of a store, for example, if I was in an area and there was like a store and I was like on the sidewalk in front of a store selling a paper, and the store owner came out and said, "You can't sell your paper here," I would probably just move, because I just want to sell papers. I don't want to have a problem. There are some people who sell communist newspapers, and again, they have the right to do this, okay? I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just telling you my approach, right? If I'm out in front of a store and I was selling a newspaper, and this happens, someone walks out of the store, "You can't sell that here," I would go, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." And I would move, right? Um, there's some communists, and they want to make a point, okay? And they have their right in the point that they're making, but so they're selling that newspaper, and someone comes out, "You can't sell that here." They say, "Yes, I can sell that here, you fucking capitalist pig. You just called the cops." Well, I don't do that, right? For me, I'd much rather sell the paper on the other side of the street and not go to jail that night. So but it just depends, right? It just depends where you go. One thing I will say, Detroit, I used to leaflet in Detroit. And you think that there's freedom of speech in Detroit. Good night, okay? I will tell this story, because this person who said, "Oh, you can sell a communist paper and not go to jail." Well, actually, I'll tell you about Detroit. In Detroit, in the center of Detroit, there is a public building owned by the city of Detroit called Cobo Hall. It is a public building owned by the taxpayers of Detroit. I have been kicked out of Cobo Hall and threatened with arrest more times than I ever care to mention, right? And so I spent a summer in Detroit, and there were always conferences and events happening in Cobo Hall, and I would be in Cobo Hall, and as a public building, I would go into this public building and just start handing out leaflets. It wasn't even about communism. It was about ending home foreclosures. Every time, 2 or 3 security guards, "You can't do that. This is private property." Actually, this is not private property. This is public property. "You can't do that here. You can't do that here." And the organization I was in, I'll never forget this, sued many times and won legal settlements from the government, where lawyers, and not lawyers, judges, wrote rulings. You have the right to hand out leaflets in public square. And they would print out this court ruling. And the city of Detroit would have to pay like $500-600 to the person, because their free speech was violated in court. They were kicked out of Cobo Hall. They were arrested in Cobo Hall for handing out leaflets. They would sue afterwards. The judge would say, "Yes, you have the right to hand out leaflets in Cobo Hall." And the next day we would go to Cobo Hall, and the security would be right on us. We would hold up the court rulings. We'd be like, "We have an official court document that says we have the right to hand out leaflets here in public square." And they'd say, "Yeah, I don't think the judge is here. You got a problem with that?" Privatized police is a huge problem in Detroit. Exactly, yeah. And I will never forget this. I have been threatened with arrest and kicked out of Cobo Hall. That summer, I got kicked out of Cobo Hall like 3 times a week, because they were always it was the summer Obama got elected. There was always something political happening in Cobo Hall. I would go to Cobo Hall, hand out the leaflets, and the security guards would kick me out and threaten me with arrest all the time. And we had like printed legal documents that said we were allowed to hand out leaflets in Cobo Hall. And, you know, another story, right? Another story. It's great. This didn't happen to me, but this happened to some people I know. Angela Davis, right? Communist Party vice presidential candidate like 5 times, or like 2 times, like 1980 and 1984. Communist Party member for a long time, socialist, was speaking at his college. He was in line at the college to ask her a question. And in his hands, he had some socialist leaflets. Right? So he's in line at the microphone to ask Angela Davis a question. He's in line at the microphone, right? And, they're lining up to ask Angela Davis questions during the Q&A. He's got some socialist leaflets in his hand. The woman in front of him in the line says to him, "Oh, can I have one of those?" And he says, "Sure." He hands it to her. 2 police officers run over to him. "No leafleting in the building. Let's go. You're leaving. You're going out now. You're leaving now. And escort him out of the building, out of Angela Davis's lectures, because he handed a leaflet to somebody else in the line. And he's threatened with arrest. "Oh, we can just take you out of the building, or we can take you downtown, son. You want to spend 26 hours in lockup?" This is how it is. This is how it is. A lot of colleges in the United States, I love this, they have what's called a free speech zone. Have you heard of this? Google this. A free speech zone. We have freedom of speech on our campus. It's just in this little tiny area that's miles and miles away from everybody else. And so, yes, students at our campus are allowed to hand out leaflets, and students at our campus are allowed to set up literature tables. They just have to do it in this specific zone that's miles and miles, it's far away from everyone else, so no one can possibly see them or encounter them. But, oh yeah, they can go in the free speech zone. What? We not only do we have freedom of speech at our college, we've got a specific zone called the free speech zone. It's a joke. It's a joke. It's a joke. It is a joke. It's a joke. It's a joke. Such a joke. Such a joke. Right? A lot of colleges around the United States, they have campuses where if you show up and you hand out leaflets, they've got security guards that run over to you. "You can't do that here. Are you a student here? You can't do that." No, trust me. As somebody who has spent a long time handing out leaflets to people, the person who said, "Oh, you handed out that, and you're free." Well, in New York City, yes, right? In New York City, yes. In New York City, yes. So there you go. But there you go. That's kind of how this stuff works, right? Yeah, these zones sound like they're out on the back paddock. Exactly, David. No, it's wild. Another thing that they do, right, in some cities, and this is just sad. It's not a free speech issue, but it's just sad. It's cruel. So if you're a homeless person, you're allowed to beg for money, right? But you have to get a license. You have to get a panhandler's license to beg for money. And you can only beg for money in the panhandling zone. So beggars, poor people, right? They just want to beg for money. So in order to beg for money, they have to pay $200 first to get a license from the city to beg for money, right? Why are they begging for money? Because they don't have it, right? So, they can't afford that. Plus, when they have that license, once they've bought that license, they have to beg for money in this area that no one goes to. It's insanity. It's just like these people are begging for money, for Christ's sakes, right? It's like, oh, okay. So, and what that does, by having that rule, by having this rule that you can't beg for money unless you have a $200 license that says you're allowed to beg for money, plus you can only beg for money in this zone, what that does is no poor person, if someone's desperate enough to be begging for money, okay? If someone's desperate enough to beg for money, are they going to go look up the laws of the city? No. So that means when a poor person starts begging for money, the police come and beat them up and put them in handcuffs and take them to jail. That's what it means. It's a way to legalize police brutality against homeless people. And a lot of cities have this. A lot of suburbs, a lot of places, It's like, oh, you don't have a panhandler's license. Oh, you're not in the panhandling zone, and they beat them up. And these are poor people. They're not going to sue. They don't have lawyers. They're going to hire a lawyer to sue for their rights being violated? Of course not. They're struggling. They're homeless. They're not going to do anything, right? And that's the whole thing, right? And so their rights get violated, and they get badly treated, right? This happens all the time. All the time, this kind of thing happens, right? People gloss over this. People think that the United States is this big, happy, happy, fun land where, everyone has freedom and all of that. And it's like, well, look into the details, right? You know, it's not as nice as you might think it is. It's much more crazy. But there's people like you. There's people like you who's watching this right now who want to change that. And we keep it going. We keep the flame going. We keep beating the drum about right and wrong and about we're not going to take it and fighting the ruling class. And we don't let anybody stop us. We keep moving. We keep fighting back. We keep resisting. We keep doing what we're going to do. And we are eventually going to bring socialism to the United States of America. We're going to do it.